While the Seahawks have yet to officially announce any of the hirings, there have been 4 assistant coaches on the offensive side of the football linked to the Seahawks. We're going to be diving into each and every one of those prospective hires here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, who's actually on vacation, but we're still going to be doing a show here today. Those of you wonder where he's at, he is going to be snowmobiling in Yellowstone. So going to be a lot of fun for him, but we get to have a show with him talking drafts. So, of course, he's going to be joining the show for that. Absolutely. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there as always, whether you're listening in Astoria, Oregon, or Salem, Massachusetts. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks have a quartet of reported hirings on the offensive side of the football that we're going to be diving into today, plus our weekly mailbag segment and the second installment of Mock Draft Monday. A lot of Pac-12 flavor in today's mock drafts that we're going to be diving into for the Seahawks at pick number 16. This episode brought your way by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your first bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Seattle has yet to officially announce any of these hirings, but based on sources that we have talked to, all 4 of the reported hirings that are out there on the offensive side of the football are going to happen. I would not be surprised if at some point this afternoon, Rob, that we have 4 new hirings that are added officially to the Seahawks coaching staff under Mike Macdonald. And the first notable one is a division rival, at least the last 2 years, Jake Peetz as the pass game specialist for Sean McVay in LA. And this has been a popular thing for the Seahawks to do. They brought Shane Waldron over from the Rams. Now they're bringing in a new passing game coordinator in Jake Peetz, who, for being a younger coach, has a pretty extensive coaching history, including 2 different stints working for Nick Saban at Alabama.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like most about Jake Peetz, Corbin, is the fact that he is as well-traveled, is as experienced as he is, and yet has worked with a high number of explosive offenses and very productive head coaches. You mentioned the fact that he was the OC at Alabama, is also the OC at LSU, and has been in the NFL for a significant amount of time. Those of you watching on YouTube, and as Corbin always says, thank you so very much for all of you watching and listening. He was previously the passing game specialist with the LA Rams and Sean McVay. Also has worked with the Carolina Panthers, the Oakland Raiders. Of course, now they're in Las Vegas, the Washington Commanders and Jacksonville Jaguars. He's only 38 years old, Corbin, and the fact that he has moved around as much as he has, I think it's going to be easy for some to suggest that this is not a popular coach, that he has bounced around because he hasn't been able to latch on with any particular coaching tree. And I think it's the exact opposite of that. There's been 3 different head coaches that he's worked for twice over his time. That would be Nick Saban, Sean McVay, and then Jack Del Rio, where not only was he, again, an offensive coach, he also served as a scout for 4 years in Jacksonville. And I love the fact that he has not only the coaching pedigree, but the scouting hat as well.
Yeah, the Seahawks have hired a couple coaches. We'll talk about another one here in a few moments that has a brief scouting background in the NFL as well. But of course, I've got to go to the running back position again because I am still glowing about the hire of Kennedy Polamalu. And I have talked to a few team sources who have indicated that he absolutely is going to be the running backs coach for the Seahawks. And I am just giddy. Anybody that listens to this podcast knows I'm a running back guy. It's the position I played. It's the position I coached varsity football for 7 years. It's the position I take pride in scouting, unless you're Trent Richardson. That was still the biggest miss that I ever had at that position, but I was not alone. There were a lot of other people that thought he was going to be a spectacular NFL player. But nonetheless, Kennedy Polamalu, the track record speaks for itself. Not just the guy that has been a special teams coordinator for Pete Carroll at USC, but his running back background. Just to put into perspective, Rob, this is the running back group that has gone over 1,000 yards on teams coached by Kennedy Polamalu. Fred Taylor, I think this is the most impressive thing on his resume. Fred Taylor was past 30 years old and had back-to-back seasons with over 1,100 rushing yards, and he averaged over 5 yards per carry in each of those seasons in 2006 and 2007. 2 years later, Maurice Jones-Drew, his first 1,000-yard season, he finished in the top 5 in the NFL that year with Polamalu coaching him. And then you had Dalvin Cook, 3 straight years with the Minnesota Vikings. You had Josh Jacobs, who won the rushing title in 2022 for the Las Vegas Raiders, over 1,600 rushing yards. This is an incredible resume for a running back coach who I believe is top 3, maybe the best in the NFL. When you consider, it just seems like everywhere he goes, he is able to maximize the talent that he has. Even his first year as a running back coach in 2004 with Cleveland, the Browns had a bunch of injuries, and he still had 3 running backs finished with over 650 rushing yards. I just think this guy is an incredible teacher. I've listened to him at a couple coaching clinics before. The drill work that he does, his attention to detail. Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet should be licking their chops about the opportunity to be able to learn from this guy.
No question about it, Corbin. I think that, and one of the, let's just, speak to the elephant in the room. When you have a last name like Polamalu, people are going to ask, is he related to Troy? Yes, he's actually the uncle. And the first name Kennedy was because the Seahawks' new running back coach was actually born November 22nd, 1963, the day that the great U.S. president was assassinated, and his family decided to name him after the late, great president. So again, just a couple of interesting factoids about Kennedy Polamalu, besides the fact that, as you said, he is a terrific running back coach. So I'm very excited about him. And also the fact that he's 60 years old, kind of like we talked about before with Leslie Frazier, just being kind of the elder statesman on the defensive side of the ball. I think that when you have a running back coach who has the experience that Kennedy Polamalu has, I think that's something that's important to Mike Macdonald's staff. I want to switch over to the wide receiver coach here that, at least reportedly, has been hired by the Seahawks, Frisman Jackson. And this is a guy that, I remember scouting him way back when he was coming from Western Illinois. He spent, I believe it was 5-6 years in the NFL himself. He is coached at, he's a coach that actually returned to his alma mater, Western Illinois, and became one of the, where he was a terrific receiver there, obviously, again, getting himself an NFL look, but then returns back to Western Illinois to be the wide receiver coach. Has since moved on to several other colleges, Akron, Northern Illinois, jumps up to NC State, Temple, Baylor. When he was at Temple and Baylor, that's where he worked with Matt Rule, who, of course, was the Carolina Panthers head coach. And the Seahawks, of course, know that the Carolina Panthers current general manager, Dan Morgan, former scout with the Seahawks, as well as their former general manager, Scott Fitterer, who was with the Seahawks. So they've done their homework with Frisman Jackson as well. He's also been with the Tennessee Titans, the Pittsburgh Steelers, 2 teams, especially in Tennessee and in Pittsburgh, Corbin, who expect their wide receivers to block as well as catch passes. So I'm excited about the addition of Frisman Jackson as a wide receiver coach as well.
And he also was a scout for 1 year as well. So you have another coach, as you mentioned, with Jake Peetz, who's got a scouting background. So does Frisman Jackson. So you've got a couple coaches that have been able to do these different things. And then the quarterback coach, Charles London. I did a bonus episode on Saturday, and I had an opportunity to break down his resume. Obviously, he was a running back coach for most of his NFL career because that's the position he played. But he has coached quarterbacks the last 3 years in Atlanta and in Tennessee. And just to put in perspective what he's done in those 2 places, in Atlanta, very similar situations. He was not in ideal circumstances, teams that were rebuilding, but his 1 year in Atlanta, he coached Marcus Mariota for, I believe, 13 starts, and then rookie Desmond Ridder came in. And I thought Desmond Ridder played really well in the 4 starts he had at the end of his rookie season. He had 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, completed almost 65% of his passes, and he played pretty well. Marcus Mariota did a nice job on play action and had some 15 touchdowns, average almost 7.5 yards per attempt. So I think fans got to look a little deeper when you're just saying, oh, he coached the Falcons quarterbacks. Well, that's not a very good coaching job. Consider the circumstances and what he was able to do with a rookie quarterback late in the year. I think that's impressive. And then you look in Tennessee this last season, really the same situation. Ryan Tannehill's the starter at the beginning of the year, a seasoned veteran. He gets hurt. Will Levis takes over. Levis had 8 touchdowns and 16 big-time throws, according to PFF, in just 9 starts. Obviously, the completion rate's not where you want, but he had some really impressive moments as a rookie for the Titans. So I think you got to give some credit to Charles London. He's been able to coach veterans and rookie quarterbacks. He's coming to Seattle with Geno Smith most likely being the starter and a really good chance the Seahawks draft a quarterback. He's already shown that he can handle those duties, coaching both experienced vets and up-and-coming rookie quarterbacks. And so I do think that this is a hire that some fans may be questioning a little bit just because he doesn't have an extensive background coaching quarterbacks. But I still think that this is a guy that's done some pretty good things with not such great circumstances. So again, all 4 of these hires, they're not official yet. I would anticipate today the Seahawks will be announcing at least a few of these as official. But this offensive staff starting to come together. They're getting some really experienced coaches to go with their first-time coordinators. And I think it's an exciting development on the offensive side of the football. Up next, we're going to shift gears to our Monday mailbag. Going to be tackling questions from you, the valued 12s. That'll be coming up next year on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, such as who's going to make the first basket of the night when the Lakers are back in action after the All-Star break. Live same-game parlays, including Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, each scoring 25 points for the Warriors. Exclusive props such as how King James will score his 40,000th point and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, who's going to be snowmobiling in Yellowstone. So he's really excited for that little bit of a trip. But first, he's going to be running here to talk draft here in a little bit. We're going to have mock draft Monday. Before we get to that point, though, for all our valued 12s, it's time for our Monday mailbag segment, tackling questions from you, the 12s. And we got some really good ones today. And this one's going to get Rob excited. Our first one coming from J Sierra 891. Is Brock Bowers a legitimate player that could fall to 16? And if John Schneider is still going by the best player available, is he the choice, seeing as he's a top 5 talent in this draft?
I think he absolutely would be the best player available to Seattle. I think that there is basically a snowball's chance in hell that he is going to, that Brock Bowers is going to drop the number 16 overall quarterback. And I don't mean to be, sarcastic about that, but I just view Brock Bowers as being truly one of the elite blue chip talents in this draft class. I don't think that this is a draft class that has a lot of blue chip players. I think this is an underrated tight end crop as a whole, but there is no doubt about who is the number 1 tight end here. Obviously, tight end is a potential position of concern for the Seahawks. So again, if there were some chance that he was to slip, then I think it'd be some kind of medical or character concern, which I don't think there's going to be any type of concern like that. And so I just don't think that there's any chance that Brock Bowers is available to the Seahawks, at least at number 16 overall.
Our next question here coming from Ways in Hamburg on X. If Tyler Lockett retires this offseason, how much would Seattle owe him? Now, I don't anticipate that this is going to happen, but I think this is an excellent question because we are talking about a player, Tyler Lockett, who is well-rounded off the field. And he may be one of those players who just decides, you know what, I've had a great career. It's time for me to move on to the next step. I don't think that's going to happen, but it is a good question because there have been some rumors out there. There's been some speculation that maybe Seattle might consider making a move on that front because he's getting to be an older player and he has a cap hit over $25 million this year. So there has been some discussion with that. But if Tyler Lockett was to retire, it's much like if a player is cut in terms of the way that the contract is paid out, the remainder of it is paid out. And how it works is if a player retires before June 1st, then it's just like a cut with a June 1st, pre-June 1st designation, and all the payouts and the cap hits will be based off of that, what would be a first cut. after June 1st, then it's functioning the same way. You're going to have a different allocation of your signing bonuses. That's going to impact the way that the cap hit is. And it would be a lower cap hit for the Seahawks if he retired after that point. But what is interesting, what makes retirement different, there is what is called the Barry Sanders rule. And it was named that for a reason, because Barry Sanders abruptly retired from the Detroit Lions. And the Lions made him pay back part of the signing bonus that he was given for his contract, because he had several years left in his deal. The Seahawks could do that with Tyler Lockett if he retired. And so the cap hit overall would not be as big as what it would have been if he was cut or he's traded. They could get some of that money back from those signing bonuses with the Barry Sanders rule, but really it's not that different in a sense that you're still going to have the contract terms, the salary cap, things like that. You still have to pay the player, but he could have to give up some of his signing bonus if he decided to walk away. Our next question for Rob, coming from Ignite_Clo. In terms of defensive improvements, what would you say are realistic expectations on where the Seahawks will land in Macdonald's first season? And what would you personally see as a successful season, both in process and outcome?
Well, I think number one, the simplest, return to the playoffs. And I think that if the Seahawks are going to be able to do that, then they've got to shore up their defense. Now, there are two primary numbers that I think that we have to focus in on here. Number one is, again, you have to be much, much better in terms of slowing down the running game. Opponents, I've used the statistic so many times, but I think that it is the most important statistic on the defensive side of the ball, and that is the Seahawks finished 31st out of 32 teams in touchdowns allowed on the ground. And so that, to me, is something that has to drastically improve. I think you got to be in the top half of the league if you were going to be a realistic contender for Super Bowl glory. And then number two, I think that the pass rush has got to improve. And the Seattle's pass rush, if you look at the numbers, then the Seattle's pass rushers are actually pretty solid this past season. But a huge part of that was that one game against the New York Giants where the Seahawks basically were setting records for the number of sacks that they had in that one particular game. You throw that game out the window, then the Seahawks were very much in the bottom third of the NFL. So I don't expect the Seahawks necessarily to be first in the NFL in sacks the way that Mike Macdonald and his Baltimore Ravens were a year ago. But I definitely think that, again, if you're going to return to the playoffs, I think you got to be in the top 10. And considering the pass rushers that the Seahawks have already on the roster, especially like a player like Uchenna Nwosu, and what they might be in a Boye Mafe, for example, and what they might be able to get in this year's draft class, I think that is realistic expectations.
Next question here, and this one is going to be fun. I think both of us can answer this one. Favorite NFL Combine memory or story? And this is from Tyrell J453 via Threads. It might be hard to believe, but the Combine's coming up not this week, but next week. And I've only gone to 4 Combines, so I can't say that I've had an extensive run. I know some guys that have been there 25 straight years. There's a lot of guys that are at that event that are seasoned veterans compared to me. But the thing that still jumps out, there's been some crazy things. I got to see Shaquem Griffin the first year that I was there doing the bench press. That was insane. Him doing 20 reps with a prosthetic hand. That was just insane. But I would actually say the thing that jumps out to me still the most, there's all kinds of stories in the background that happen. But as far as on the field events, seeing A.J. Dillon at 250 pounds almost clock a sub 4.5 40-yard dash, and Jordan Davis, what he did was pretty dang impressive too. So there's the big guys running really fast. Those are the things that always jump out to me at the Combine.
Yeah, for me, there have just been so many athletes and put up some incredible just results. That I think that it's hard to pick out just one. I remember watching Calvin Johnson. Basically, they were suggesting that he shouldn't run. And when he was kind of challenged, he just was like, all right, screw it, let's just throw on some shoes and I'll just go. And then he runs the time like in the high 4.2s, low 4.3s, depending on your clock. But just to see an athlete of that caliber, just say, oh, the heck with it, I'm just going to go. That was impressive. Corey, my favorite Combine memory is I've been very, very fortunate fortunate as I've gone to, I don't know, a dozen, 15 combines over the years. And I was among the very first media that was allowed to go into the quarterback and wide receiver workouts. And I remember, sitting next to the late, great John Clayton, Peter King, people like that. And, I'm just this draft analyst. At the time, I was working for NFLDraftScout.com, and we were paired with CBS Sports. And that's where I really kind of learned that how much I knew in comparison to some of these big time media names out there that didn't necessarily know the draft classes. So again, I have some of the biggest names in all of NFL media asking me questions about this quarterback or that quarterback or this wide receiver or whatever the case might be. So I have so many great memories of Indianapolis and the NFL Combine that it'd take up a 35-minute show just kind of breaking all those down.
Our last question here, this one coming from DK_Wookie1, Star Wars combined with the Seahawks. I love it. Lots of crazy rumors going around. Who is most likely to be traded? Riq Woolen, Geno Smith, DK Metcalf. And I will say it's rumors, Rob. That's really the key word here. It's rumors. And I think in a lot of cases it's speculation. And that's what it is this time of year. It's speculation season. So of course, people are going to be mentioning the idea that Geno Smith can still be moved before March 18th, and the Seahawks can offload a big chunk of his salary cap if they want to. DK Metcalf, if you're really wanting to reset the table and get high draft picks, that might be the best player to move to do that. And Riq Woolen had somewhat of a disappointing sophomore season, but he was still a Defensive Rookie of the Year finalist 2 years ago, and he's a freak athlete. So there may be some teams out there willing to throw you some draft picks if you're deciding, hey, it's time for us to move on from him. In all honesty, Rob, of these three, I would actually say Geno Smith is probably the most likely to get moved, and I don't expect that that's going to happen, but that is the player of these three that I could see most realistically being moved. I don't see Seattle giving up on Riq Woolen after 2 seasons, especially with Mike Macdonald now taking over as a defensive head coach. He's not going to offload one of his best young players. It's not going to happen. And on the offensive side of the ball, DK Metcalf is highly regarded in this organization, and he's coming off a very strong finish to last season. Ryan Grubb is going to be really upset if he finds out they traded DK Metcalf. So I don't see any of these moves happening, but I would say Geno Smith's probably the highest probability just because of his age and the situation that they've got with his contract.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I like the way that you kind of described it. I think that there's a possibility for all three of these players, just because, again, we know the value of quarterbacks and the fact that this is a good quarterback class. This is a new head coach, a new OC, all that kind of stuff coming in. They're going to have their own evaluations. And we've talked so much about what Ryan Grubb already knows, of course, not only about Michael Penix Jr., but just Pac-12 and all of the quarterbacks, really. He, of course, played the national championship game against J.J. McCarthy, for example. So I think that those are some possibilities. DK Metcalf, I think, would fetch the most just because he is still in the prime of his career. But, at the same time, and Seattle, of course, only has the 7 draft picks at this point, don't have that second-round selection. So perhaps it's like what the Seahawks did when they acquired DK Metcalf in the first place. Of course, they traded Frank Clark, got all those selections, and were able to select Metcalf years ago. I think Riq Woolen's an interesting one. I don't think that the Seahawks want to trade Riq Woolen, but I can tell you this. I think that Mike Macdonald is not going to have the allegiance to Riq Woolen that Pete Carroll had. And you have to play run defense if you're going to play for Mike Macdonald. Physicality, consistency, reliability are going to be absolute. They're not just going to be words. They are going to be themes. They're going to be the whole core of what he's looking to do. So I don't think that the Seahawks are going to want to give up a player as gifted as Riq Woolen is. I think he can become an absolute superstar for Mike Macdonald. But if there is not immediate buy-in from Riq Woolen, then I do think that he is a player that other teams out there in the NFL would be intrigued because of the talent, because of the upside, because of the low contract. And so he is somebody I think to at least pay attention to. But I agree with you, Corbin. I don't think the Seahawks are going to be trading any of their veterans on this team. I think that they're going to basically go from what they already have and use the draft picks as they currently have it slated.
Coming up next, speaking of the draft, it's Mock Draft Monday. We're going to check out 3 mock drafts dished out this weekend. Pick number 16, who are the Seahawks bringing in to bolster their roster? We'll dive into those picks coming up next year on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry or start ripping your hair out when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Want to see the Seattle Kraken at Climate Pledge Arena as they try to get back into the playoffs? Thanks to Game Time's awesome flash deals feature and a detailed stadium map, you can find excellent seats to watch the Kraken at home for under $120, and it's super easy. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less elsewhere, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It's back to Mock Draft Monday. And I can tell you, Rob, the mock drafts, they are flying off the shelves here as we get closer to the NFL scouting combine, all kinds of great mock drafts out there. When you pick at number 16, it's a little different than number 5, like last year, where you could have your chance to get one of the blue chip players. At number 16, that's not going to happen. And it opens up the world of possibilities who could be available there. So a lot of different options being drafted, being mocked to the Seahawks. The first one we're going to look at here is coming from Kyle Stackpole on CBS. And this is a player we've talked about already a little bit on the show because of your background, being able to evaluate offensive linemen, being involved in the Pac-12 with the Morris Trophy as well. Jackson Powers Johnson, the center from Oregon, also can play guard, being the pick on this one. And I absolutely love this kid. I loved him before he had a great week in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. I also love the fact that he gave up one pressure in pass protection this entire season. That is not a fictional stat. That is really what happened. One pressure this entire season. I went back and watched a few of his games, and I got bored because he was so good and so dominant.
Yeah, he really was. As you said, only had one pressure allowed all year long. Now, the pushback I would give to that, and the reason why I did not have him as a first-round selection entering the week of practice is who's the competition that he faced in the Pac-12, at defensive tackle specifically. There's not a lot of competition there, but he was absolutely dominant there. And then I will give you credit there, Corbin. I mean, you projected that he would be very successful in Mobile, and if he wasn't just successful, he was absolutely dominant in Mobile. And we all know the Seahawks have historically focused in on players who have had splashy performances at the Senior Bowl, and that's exactly what he did. I love the fact that you mentioned that he has the center and guard flexibility. The biggest concern I have about Jackson Powers Johnson is the fact that he was blocking for one of the most dynamic athletes at the quarterback position, so it's a little bit easier to pass protect. And again, the level of competition that he faced. He was only a one-year starter at Oregon. That said, when he came in to play guard previously in his career, he was spectacular. And when he played center again this past season, he has the power that his name suggests. He's also very, very quick, very balanced for a man who came in Mobile, 6'3", 330 pounds. It's not often that a guy comes into an all-star game and he's even heavier than he was listed and yet looks in better shape. That's very, very rare. And that's exactly what JPJ did. And so that's one of the reasons why I think that he would make an awful lot of sense for the Seahawks, whether it be at number 16 overall or in a possible trade down. He, like we talked about before with the tight end Brock Bowers from Georgia, there's no question about it, at least in my opinion, and I believe in yours as well. Jackson Powers Johnson is the number one center in this draft class by a significant margin.
What I love about him is the fact that he can win in the run game in a variety of ways. He has those quick feet to be able to win in the zone blocking scheme, but he'll also knock you off the ball. He'll knock dudes down at the second level. He consistently takes good angles. My only real concern that I have is he's going to have issues with the really athletic interior pass rushers in the NFL, because there have been a few plays. And again, it's a few, because there's very few instances where he got beat in college as a pass protector this last year. But there were a few times where you could see some potential issues going against athletic guys with quick first steps in the interior that offer power to go with that. So we'll see how he stacks up. But I think he is definitely a clear-cut mid-first round pick right now, and would make a ton of sense for the Seahawks at number 16. Now, we mentioned the pass rush earlier, and you've got Uchenna. Derek Hall is going to be coming back. Maybe Darrell Taylor. We don't know what's going to happen on that front. The Seahawks already have some bodies rushing off the edge. But Mike Macdonald's, you mentioned with Riq Woolen, he might not have allegiance to any of these players on the edge. It's possible Seattle could make some moves on that front, and maybe there's a pass rusher in the first round that he absolutely cannot resist drafting. John Schneider certainly would be on board with that as well. And one name that I think would make a ton of sense, this one was mocked by Ryan Fowler of Draft Network, that would be Dallas Turner, the explosive athlete off the edge for the Alabama Crimson Tide. You want to talk about a player that, there's a handful of players each draft cycle that fit this bill, Rob, but this is one of those guys where you start watching Alabama because they've got so many blue chippers. You start watching Alabama to look at somebody else, and you just cannot keep your eyes off of number 15, 10 sacks, 14 and a half tackles for a loss, 50 tackles. And yet that really doesn't paint the clear picture here. He's under 250 pounds. So maybe that would be one concern I would have. How is he going to hold up physically against NFL offensive linemen? Yet at the same time, I see that physicality. I see the quick first step, the explosiveness of the line of scrimmage. And I see a guy that makes a major impact on plays, even when he isn't getting quarterback hits and sacks. And that is critical. This guy has got a motor that is always running hot, very competitive player. He strikes me as somebody Mike Macdonald could fall in love with. And if he's there at number 16, I don't care who you got on the roster, he would make some sense for the Seahawks.
Yeah, he would. I mean, again, I think that it's critical that the Seahawks improve their pass rush. You don't know what, say a Boye Mafe is going to be. You expect that he's going to be, continue to ascend. You expect Uchenna Nwosu is going to be able to come back from a significant knee injury. I fully expect that Darrell Taylor is going to be somebody the Seahawks are going to bring back. He's a restricted free agent, not unrestricted, because he missed, of course, his rookie season with Seattle due to the injury sustained back in college. And then again, you expect improvement from Derek Hall. But there's a lot of expectations here and not a lot of, just proof. And that's the thing, is that Dallas Turner is like Jackson Powers Johnson, we mentioned before, is basically a one-year starter at Alabama. That's because he was behind ultimately the number 3 overall selection and the defensive rookie of the year, Will Anderson Jr. And, when you lose a player of Will Anderson Jr.'s pedigree from Alabama, you would expect to drop down in production. Instead, Alabama was even better. And Dallas Turner and on the other side, Chris Braswell were both terrific players for the Crimson Tide. I think it's a player that Mike Macdonald is going to like. I think it's a player that John Schneider is going to like for the same reasons that Jackson Powers Johnson might be intriguing, because these are players that still were only, again, 1 year starters. There's a belief out there that there's untapped potential with Dallas Turner. So I think that he would make an awful lot of sense and very much be among the best players available if he were still on the board at number 16.
That's not the only pass rusher that we had linked to the Seattle Seahawks here. We've also got a mock draft from Dan Benton of Yahoo. And Rob, I know that this is a player that you are very excited to talk about because he started at Washington before going to UCLA, and a very different pass rusher than Dallas Turner, but certainly somebody that had major stats at UCLA and might even sneak into the top 10 if the right team falls in love with him in this process.
Yeah, Laiatu Latu from UCLA, Corbin, is the most polished pass rusher in this draft class. And, as you mentioned, he started his career at the University of Washington. I was fortunate enough to meet Laiatu at the Morris Trophy Award presentation in Seattle, where he had an opportunity to kind of mingle with his former teammate, Trey Fautanu, from the University of Washington. What was interesting is how much of a brotherhood that they still had to this day. And so that just kind of speaks to Laiatu Latu's, selflessness and his just his dedication to the game. And again, when you watch him on tape, Corbin, you're going to see a guy who not only has some burst, but he chops his hands really well. He locates the football very well. UCLA used him in a variety of different ways. So it really speaks to his instincts, his size, his physicality. He does everything well. He's just not quite the same tester athletically that I expect Dallas Turner to be. And I mentioned the athletic testing and things like that, the combine. Unfortunately, the reason why Laiatu Latu left the University of Washington is because he had a neck injury and UW refused to clear him. And one of the only teams out there that did accept him was UCLA. Their team doctor actually was the doctor that did the evaluation for Laiatu Latu. And so we know the Seahawks have traditionally been a little bit more risk adverse when it comes to evaluating prospects. So I would be surprised if Latu is going to be a Seattle Seahawk moving in the future. But if he does get that medical clearance, Corbin, he led the Pac-12 in sacks, in tackles for loss, and in forced fumbles. I mean, the man is as productive as it possibly can get off the edge. And again, he plays with a desire that I think is uncommon. And so that's exactly what Mike Macdonald and what John Schneider are going to prioritize if they want to keep the culture that Pete Carroll helped create in Seattle.
Yeah, the neck injury, that is something that I would really put as a major red flag here, especially for a team like the Seattle Seahawks. Now, maybe the fact that he has now played the last couple years and he has played at such a high level, maybe that changes things. You say, well, he was cleared, he was able to play, didn't have any repercussions from it. We feel comfortable with this. But medicals are arguably the most important thing that happens at the scouting combine. And so he is going to be a name to watch very closely to see how teams assess him. Do the Seahawks clear him? Do other teams clear him in this draft process? How big of a concern is that? Because you are talking about a guy that can be an absolute game wrecker. Now, my only reservation when I watch him on film, you mentioned the athletic testing. Sometimes that shows up in the game film. And I'm wondering, are we going to see enough burst from this guy that he is going to be able to translate his production to the NFL, especially when it comes to being able to dip around guys off edge? I just have some reservations. Now, if he goes out and tests a little better than expected, then yeah, absolutely home run first round pick if you clear him. But I do have some questions a little bit about, is he going to be one of those guys that is able to translate his stats to the NFL? Whereas Dallas Turner, I look at him and I say, I see NFL first step there. I don't always see that from Latu. So that is something to keep in mind here along with the medicals. But both these guys were extremely productive college football players in Power 5 programs. So I certainly expect, as long as the medicals check out, that both of them are going to be in the mix for the Seahawks at number 16 and most likely will be gone in the first 20 selections in April. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up on our Tuesday show, we've been saying we were going to do this for a few days, and we've had all these coaching hires. We're going to look at some Michigan defensive prospects that could be on the board for the Seahawks that might have been coached by a certain Mike Macdonald a few years ago. We're going to be doing that. Plus, we'll be diving into some free agency stuff as well. Make sure that you are listening in, and thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.